All right, I think it's the top of the hour, and welcome to this next segment of our Acting for Justice While Sheltering in Place series of Just Faith Ministries. My name's Jack Jezreel. I'm the founder of Just Faith Ministries and now serve as the senior advisor with an emphasis on senior. I'm delighted that you could join us tonight, and we're in for a real treat, I think, this evening. So let me begin with a prayer. This is an excerpt from the writing of someone that some of you may know, author and Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor. She writes, "In Sunday school, I learned to think of God as a very old, white-bearded man on a throne who stood above creation and occasionally stirred it with a stick. When I'm dreaming quantum dreams, what I see is an infinite web of relationship flung across the vastness of space like a luminous net. It is made of energy, not thread. As I look, I can see light moving through it as a pulse moves through veins. What I see out there is no different from what I feel inside. There's a living hum that might be coming from my neurons, but might just as well be coming from the furnace of the stars. When I look up at them, there is a small commotion in my bones as the ashes of dead stars that house my marrow rise up like metal filings toward the magnet of their living kin. Where am I in this picture? I'm all over the place. I'm up there, down here, inside my skin and out. I'm large compared to a virus and small compared to the sun, with a life that is permeable to them both. Am I alone? How could I ever be alone? I'm part of a web that is pure relationship with energy available to me that has been around since the universe was born. Where is God in this picture? God is all over the place. God is up there, down here, inside my skin and out. God is the web, the energy, the space, the light, not captured in them as if any of those concepts were more real than what unites them, but revealed in that singular, vast net of relationship that animates everything that is. It is not enough for me to proclaim that God is responsible for all this unity. Instead, I want to proclaim that God is the unity, the very energy, the very intelligence, the very elegance and passion that make it all go. This is the God who is not somewhere, but everywhere. The God who may be prayed to in all directions at once. Amen. Thanks, Leela. Over the last couple of years, Just Faith Ministries has committed itself to expanding its reach as wide as possible within the Christian community. And one of the happy chapters in this expanding work is a new partnership with World Renew, which is a ministry of the Christian Reformed Church, with this mission statement for those of you who are unfamiliar with the organization. Compelled by God's deep passion for justice and mercy, we join communities around the world to renew hope, reconcile lives, and restore creation. I encourage you to look at their website, worldrenew.net. One of the, Kris, is this okay? Shining stars of World Renew is our speaker this evening, Kris Van Egen. Kris is the Constituency Justice Mobilizing Coordinator at World Renew. He works with people of faith, churches, and vulnerable groups to better understand the life-impacting justice challenges in our world today and to build political will for action. Kris previously worked as a team leader of the Christian Reformed Church's Office of Social Justice, and he is an ordained minister in the Reformed Church of America. Having grown up as one of many generations of farm workers, Kris is especially interested in topics of food security, immigration, and creation care. Kris, we're delighted to be partnered with World Renew, and we're delighted that you could join us this evening, and the microphone is all yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that I'm a shining star. I don't know if I am one of the shining stars, but I like the verse in Philippians that says that our faith in sanctification is so that we can shine like stars in the universe. And when I visit like community development projects that World Renew has going on, or that other organizations have going on too, I always think that the people in those communities, whatever the project is, really are shining stars. So we're going to talk about creation care, and when I think about visiting communities that are on the front lines of climate change, and how they're changing farming practices that have been done for generations to be able to adapt. So sometimes neighbors look and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then they show their neighbors what they're doing and talk their neighbors into doing it too. You know, like they're real shining stars. And I hope that all of us, with our faith, as we sometimes do things that look weird, maybe, or different to our neighbors and the people around us, we can kind of explain, "Hey, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing too." So that's kind of a big picture of what we're going to get into more as we talk about creation care here. I'm going to share my screen in a second. And as I'm doing so, I just want to invite you all to look away from your screens and to really plant your feet firmly on the ground if you can, or if you're seated and your feet don't reach the ground, feel yourself planted firmly in your chair, and feel the breath going into and out of your lungs, and feel that ground of the earth there supporting you, and feel the air supporting your lungs, supporting your blood. And just take a couple deep breaths and allow your breathing to slow down. So God's word starts out with those words of "in the beginning," and it describes the story of creation, and it describes the story of God's Spirit hovering and calling the things that we see around us in this creation into being. And as we feel that ground beneath us, or feel that chair securely holding us, and as we feel that breath drawing into our lungs and going back out, and look and see the creation around us, it's good to remember that we are a part of this creation. God picked up dirt and formed it and breathed his own life, or breathed God's own life into it, and formed us in God's image. And while we bear God's image, we're also a part of creation. That means that what happens to creation happens to all of us. If and when creation is broken or desecrated, that happens to us because we are a part of creation. If creation and when creation is taken care of in a way that glorifies God, that impacts us because we see who God is and we see whose image we're made in more clearly. We are integral parts of creation. And one other thing I want to share about that, as integral parts of creation, all of our neighbors are integral parts of creation too. So as we think about the topic of climate change and creation care, there are a couple reasons why we as people of faith feel this impulse inside of ourselves to care for creation. One has to do with the idea that we're a part of creation, and the other has to do with the idea that we're called to love our neighbors. What we do with this creation, what we do with the world that God has given us, impacts our neighbors as well. The best example of that is that things upstream impact people downstream. So if I pollute upstream, it impacts my neighbors downstream. And that can happen on a local level, and that can happen on a global level. So as people who are called to care for creation, and as people who are called to love our neighbors, and as people who recognize this creation just as the gift that it is, made by God's own hand, we sense a deep call to really care for creation. And I want us to think about, for the next little while, to think about that call, especially as it relates to the topic of climate change. And I'm going to invite you all to do a little survey with me, a little poll, I guess I'll call it, for the next couple of minutes. You can just like do this on your own fingers. Whatever number you're at, you can hold that up in your hand and then hang on to it and see where you come out on the chart that I'll reveal in a little bit here. So this Yale study on climate change says that there are 6 Americas when it comes to global warming. They divide it into 6 Americas. So here's where you can give yourself a number. Number 1 are people who believe that climate change is happening and that our response to it must be urgent. So if you feel yourself there, you can give yourself a 1. Number 2 is people who are concerned. They believe that climate change is serious, but that it's distant in time and space, and that there isn't such an urgent need to take care of anything right now. So if that's where you are, then you can give yourself a 2. Number 3 is there are people who are cautious, not sure if climate change is happening, not sure if it's human caused, but there might be something going on, so they are cautious and paying attention. If that's where you're at, you can do the 3. Number 4 is people who are disengaged and aren't really aware of this conversation at all about climate change. You can give yourself a 5 if you feel doubtful and feel like climate change is not happening, or if it is happening, it's a part of natural causes and the natural progression of changing weather in the world. And then if you're a 6, dismissive, then you can give yourself a 6 if you feel like climate change is not happening at all. So as Yale has done this survey with people, let me click ahead on these here. You can see the spectrum here. There's a wide range of where people are at when we talk about the topic of climate change, ranging from alarmed to dismissive. You can see that a majority of people, around 70%, are somewhere on that cautious to alarmed spectrum. There's also a handful of people on that disengaged to dismissive spectrum. And wherever you are on that spectrum, you're a part of creation, and we're thinking about where we fit into this whole story of creation. So the scientists who work in the field of climate and weather, I think would mostly identify themselves on the side of alarmed. The American Association for the Advancement of Science says that climate risks are as conclusive as the link between smoking and lung cancer. So the science lines up to the same level as the science that predicts the cause that predicts that smoking is likely correlated with lung cancer. So our starting point for us at World Renew when we talk about climate change is that there is that high level of scientific consensus who along the lines of believing that climate change is real, that it's largely caused by human activity, that it's a serious threat to our world, and that it's a science, technical, and fundamentally moral and religious issue. We don't look at it as a partisan or political issue, and we even cooperate with groups that view themselves as more Republican, groups that view themselves as more Democratic, groups that view themselves as bipartisan, nonpartisan, because for people who are living on the front lines of climate change and seeing the impacts right now on their farming practices or on their communities or on their changing weather patterns, it's not a political issue. It's a real thing that's happening in their lives and in their world. So for us, the starting point is that consensus and that reality that's happening. And it's definitely not politics. And so, yeah, we want to talk about the Climate Witness Project and how we're starting from this point, and then also how you can get involved in the Climate Witness Project. There are several faith statements from lots of denominations. I should have looked up the Catholic faith statement on this. I know the Laudato Si from a few years ago, there was a pretty hefty statement from the Pope. The Christian Reformed Church, that's the church that I work at, that's partnered on the Climate Witness Project. They made a statement in 2012 already on climate change being a moral and ethical issue. And the Association of Evangelicals has made a statement as well, and many denominations have made statements on climate change, approaching it from a faith perspective. One of the things that the Christian Reformed Church said is that such a significant threat as climate change poses a threat to future generations, the poor, and the vulnerable. And that even when there are scientific uncertainties, that we can take into account the precautionary principle, which compels us to take private and public actions to address climate change. In the last couple of years, scientists and intergovernmental panels have also come out with reports describing the situation as dire and as needing to be addressed through serious change within the next 12 years before the effects are irreversible. I'm sure many of you have heard some of those statistics before from scientists, but I love this quote from Amy Lewis as well from the Wild Foundation. She says that you can't just throw out the best facts and the most concise, beautifully crafted message, because one, that's not going to reach a lot of people unless you have a distribution network repeating it over and over. But two, that doesn't actually drive mass change. What drives change is grassroots leaders across a community network that are helping influence their constituents and their congregations, one sermon, one speech, one house party at a time. And over time, there's a gradual accretion where then resistance begins to melt. And we've really learned this as the Climate Witness Project, and as we've partnered with so many other faith organizations, that change doesn't happen through our stats or charts or graphs. It happens through conversations and through building relationships and sharing each other's stories and sharing each other's hearts and each other's values. And through those stories and sharing each other's hearts and values, we do really and have really seen change on people's perceptions of and responses to climate change. And I think that's why our name, the Climate Witness Project, is fitting, because we want to bear witness to the idea that we are a part of creation and that we're here to respect and share God's love with creation as a part of creation and really reflect God's image as a part of creation. So we bear witness not through charts and graphs, even though we do have a couple of them, but especially through our relationships and through our actions that we do in our communities with each other and in and for our communities. So in 2015 is when we started this project. It was around the time of the 21st annual session of the Conference of Parties. And at that time, 195 countries sought an agreement to hold global warming to a 2 degree centigrade above pre-industrial levels. The US was one of the last countries to join in that agreement, but we did in 2016. And we are set to leave that agreement now, officially later on this year in 2020. So we may be stepping out again, and that's one of the things that we're asking our elected officials to do, is to stop the withdrawal from that agreement. Every country needs to play its part, and if we're going to slow down climate change, we really need action from every country and from every community and every state. When the US did announce that they were going to be leaving the Paris Agreement a couple of years ago, a movement that involved a lot of people of faith called We're Still In started, and campuses, churches, cities, states, counties all signed on to this document called We're Still In, saying no matter what our political leaders say, we as people who live in this nation are going to continue to do everything we can to see that our country meets the agreements of the Paris Accords. This is the mayor in the city where I live making the statement that maybe the single most important event of our lifetime, if we measure importance by global impact for the common good, will be meeting those standards of the 2015 Paris Accords. So as we've been doing this since around 2015, of course, we started out with 0 members. We started adding members and adding congregations. And I'm just sharing this kind of as a best practices way of doing a movement around an issue that has worked well for us to go beyond one congregation. We ask congregations who want to be a part to get 3 or more individuals in the congregation to sign up as partners. In this way, it's a really grassroots movement for us. We found that pastors are awesome and passionate and committed, but also are asked to sign up for and be involved in almost everything, and can be a bottleneck to some members of their congregations being able to take action themselves. So we partner with and support pastors for sure, but we really join up with those members of congregations and add on new congregations to our project through the members of congregations who have a real passion for creation care, environmental issues, and climate change. Once we get in contact with one of those individuals in a congregation, we say, hey, okay, can you find a couple of other people in the congregation who will want to join on this with you? And when they get up to that number of 3 people, then we help them to think about ways they can take action within their congregation and how they can move people in their congregation to really put what they believe into practice. A partner, when they sign up, is, like I said, it's somebody who finds more people in their congregation to join. Also, our partners, this is old language on this screenshot, it says endorse 2012 CRC task force report, but our project has gone beyond the CRC now. It has members of more than 12 denominations who are involved now. So we've taken that part out, but members now are people who just agree that climate change is real, is human caused, is a moral issue, and believe that it's something that people of faith should take action to respond to. Partners also receive communications with our resources and agree that they intend to do something on their own or with their congregations to take action. Our partners in their congregations work in 4 key areas, so we don't presume to tell churches what to do, but we want to resource people who are passionate to be able to do things that are effective. So we have resources for members of those congregations around 4 key areas of worship, education, energy stewardship, that's like of their own church grounds and maybe in their homes too, but most of our action there has been of their own church grounds. And then advocacy on policies that help to reduce carbon emissions at the local, state, and federal level. Our worship resources have included a crowdsourced creation care preaching challenge to which about 20 pastors submitted sermons on creation care and climate change. So we have those available online. There's some good ones there. We have other worship resources and bulletin inserts and litanies that groups can use as well. So if one of the group of key stakeholders in a church wants their church to address the topic of climate change in worship, we have resources for that, which I bet Just Faith has resources to help in all of these areas as well. Education. So we believe that raising awareness and deepening the understanding of the importance of climate change is hugely important. So we have many educational resources. One is called the Bangladesh Creation Care series. That's a series of short 5 to 10 minute films, 5 to 10 minute films, along with discussion guides that small groups can watch and then discuss and see how climate is impacting not just sea levels or flood levels in Bangladesh, but also impacting health, nutrition, education, the economy, how it's having impacts at every level in a country on the front lines like Bangladesh. We've also done and supported groups of churches to do films in local theaters. The film Before the Flood is a really helpful documentary on climate change that's available for free on Netflix right now, I believe. So we helped congregations to rent a theater in the community, a community theater, and spread the word out to the community. And we packed the theater and people watched before the flood and did a panel afterwards. We've also done a Cooler Smarter project. That was a group of about 40 people who came together, and they, as a group, for 7 weeks, learned about different ways to reduce their own individual footprints and made commitments to each other each week about what they were going to do, and kind of tracked their own carbon footprints. And as a group, they were able to reduce their own carbon footprint by about 40% over the course of that time, with each person doing their part. So it's kind of like how can we come together to support each other on this and all get better at it. So we can support groups to do studies like that in their own communities as well. On energy stewardship, we've been working hard, especially in the Michigan area, to help churches connect with opportunities for solar. In the last year, this has proliferated even more, where depending on what state you live in, Illinois and Indiana are really good ones. California is a good one. A lot of the East Coast states are good ones. I don't know about Kentucky. Iowa is not super helpful, but also not super difficult. Depending on what state you live in, there are federal grants for everyone, and state level and local grants too, from utilities and state, local, and federal governments to put solar on businesses and homes. For nonprofits, that's not as easy for groups to avail themselves of, but there are some nonprofit solar agencies that work with churches and nonprofits. So we've just been working hard to build those bridges for people, because it can be a great opportunity, and some of the nonprofits who help churches to do this also find investors to pay for it for the churches who, and then those investors recoup their investment, and once the project is done, the investors recoup their investment, and the church is done with solar panels that can keep powering their church for many, many years to come. And if you've been a deacon or accountant at a church, you know that energy bills for a church building can be a really big part of a budget. So that's energy stewardship. We also have 5 buildings, church buildings, who are a part of the Climate Witness Project, who have become Energy Star certified. And we can help congregations do that as well. Advocacy is, of course, a huge part of what we work on too. We took a group to participate in the People's Climate March in DC. That march was, to me, a really good example of what it means to be a person of faith who cares for creation, who advocates for justice, and who advocates for just climate policy. You can see on the picture leading up to Capitol Hill there, quite a long line of people. That's probably about half of the lineup of people. And the lineup was organized in such a way that the first groups in line were members of indigenous communities, and members of communities who are really on the front lines of climate change, meaning that their community land that they live on probably wouldn't exist in a few years because of the flooding that's happening. So that front line was people on the front lines of climate change. And the next row behind that were students and young people, because they'll also be seeing the impacts beyond what some of us will. It was the next generation. The row behind that was scientists. That was the next group, who are working hard on solutions and working hard on change. And then the final group were faith communities of all kinds of different backgrounds, saying that we stand with the communities on the front line. We stand with everyone who's working for solutions. We stand with the next generation, that we're there as people of faith to stand with all of those groups. And I think that really represents what it means to do social justice as well, right? We don't have to have all of the answers. We don't have to be in the front telling our own stories, but we do need to be there bringing attention to the issue and bringing support to those who are most impacted. And that's how we do our advocacy work. We try to include members of churches. We try to include or bring along stories of World Renew communities who are on the front lines. And we try to have diversity in terms of age, ethnic background, and gender in all of our legislative meetings that we do as well. So that is the Climate Witness Project. I think Jack has a list of action steps that you can take that I shared with him. My big action step, which can be broken down into a smaller list, is to, number one, of course, find those other people who can do this with you, because that's our way of doing this as a Climate Witness Project. If you don't have someone already and you want to get to work on caring for creation or fighting climate change, find that one or two other people who can do it with you. You seem like a pretty advanced group, so you're probably there already. And a next step is, where I don't always see a lot of people getting to, is finding that organization that you can partner with. If it's not a faith-based organization, that's okay. We believe that partnering for solutions happens across faith lines and also across faith and secular lines. We need to work together for solutions regardless of our faith backgrounds. So finding that partnership group for solutions, Citizens Climate Lobby is a great one. If you're a young person and Young Evangelicals for Climate Action is another great one. Interfaith Power and Light, I think I had that one in the list of resources that I gave Jack to send out to everyone. Interfaith Power and Light is one of the best ones, both in terms of doing energy stewardship in your own community, but especially in terms of being able to bring your voice of faith into the public square on this topic. They're great at being helpful to get in contact with your elected officials, and if you're not sure what to say to your elected officials or what solutions to promote, they're really good at organizing local people of faith around those advocacy efforts in ways that are very effective and in line with the broader movement in our nation. The next step that I would do as an action step is to partner more people in your churches with local organizations or state level organizations as well. Those are the ways that people have been taking action in the Climate Witness Project, and we really have been seeing a lot of movement. If you are interested in signing up to be a part of the Climate Witness Project, we would love to have you. And we have regional organizers, 10 regional organizers across the US who reach out to people to offer their direct support as people sign up, and also offer support to churches. So I think if whatever step you take is huge, whether it's recycling a little more, turning some more lights off, or whether it's going on a real journey of advocacy with your local officials and building relationships with them, all of those pieces are important and all of those pieces are meaningful. And I believe that the Holy Spirit works in those pieces beyond what we could ask or imagine ourselves. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Kris. I was just going to ask you, if you don't mind, if you've had any stories or experiences with legislators that you found particularly hopeful in your advocacy work. Have there been any significant light bulbs going off that you were witness to, or any investments that you hadn't seen prior to the kind of advocacy that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, for sure. Fred Upton is a Republican representative in the district just to the south of me in Holland, Michigan here. We had a group of pastors and lay leaders meet with him. This was 2 years ago in February. We met with his district director to talk about our project, to talk about legislation that we felt like would make a big impact. And his district director said, "Thank you so much." And we left some information and followed up with him to say, "Hey, do you think Representative Upton will be able to take the step that we asked him to take?" We asked him to join the bipartisan House Climate Caucus, and we did not get a response back right away. But then about a month later, we got a call from his district director again saying that Representative Upton wanted to meet with all of us himself to hear more about the project. This was then in the spring and flooding was happening all over Michigan, and he said that he's seen it himself, he's noticed it, he's been listening to the science and news reports on the topic, and that he sees it as a very important topic, and that he respects and appreciates our work and offered himself to speak at our events. He joined the Climate Solutions Caucus in the House. So it was another Republican who joined that caucus, which was a big deal. And that was just a nice highlight to us of a change on behalf of a political leader. I think the other huge thing that I've seen that has yet to show its results is an event in Lansing, the capital of Michigan, with over 100 people, faith and lay leaders and business leaders as well, went and met with our state elected officials. We have some laws in Michigan, or some, I guess, utility company policies in Michigan that make it, that kind of disincentivize solar in some ways, that we're trying to get changed. And there were a handful of really important relationships built there with elected officials that gave me a lot of hope, because this was something that was not on their radar at all before and after the meetings. They joined the group of elected officials calling for change on this area of utilities disincentivizing solar. So that was really awesome too, and it's part of our dream to see solar on top of all the churches. If it could be less disincentivized by our utilities, it could be easier. And we could save money that we could spend on other ministry.
A question from one of our participants goes something like this. She's heard that individuals making personal lifestyle changes won't stop climate change, that it's going to take government-level social policy changes. Would that be a conclusion you'd agree with?
Yes, that would be a conclusion that I agree with, but only to a point. Part of the reason why churches are taking action like on their own buildings is because we feel like it's important to take action ourselves, to be able to speak and ask government and communities to take action. And ultimately, as governments take action, it's still going to require our own action. So either way, individuals need to take action. And every church and every household that takes action is a much more powerful message than any speech or talking point that you can use in a meeting asking for these kinds of changes. Having said that, I have one of my colleagues is from Costa Rica, and when she goes home to visit her family there, she's like, she says she doesn't really have to do anything to reduce her energy footprint because they're at almost near net zero carbon emissions on their energy grid already. So, they try to conserve energy because that's what makes their grid work, by turning off the lights. But when she turns on the lights, it's not increasing her carbon footprint at all because their whole grid is that way. So it's the burden can't be on us as individuals. It has to be on our larger systems as well. And that's why advocacy is so important. There are solutions there that make economic sense and that make scientific sense. The solutions are there. We need to keep working to build the will to enact those solutions.
Kris, under the category of, in some ways, agreeing with what you just said, that it's important for our lifestyles to re-echo or reiterate what we're asking for in the way of social policy. As you've sort of gone to conferences and bumped into experts, what would be, if you can, 3 of maybe the most significant lifestyle choices that we can make personally that would impact climate change?
Eating lower on the food chain is the one that comes up all of the time. Looking at your transportation choices is the next one that comes up regularly. And then, if you also care about your bank account, a home energy audit is a biggie too, depending on how old your home is and when the last time it was audited. Was a lot of it. most states have some kind of a program that offer free home energy audits or reduced rate home energy audits. So those are a good option too.
Kris, here's an investment question. If this person writes, if I want to support and invest in climate-friendly companies, is there a place that she can go to check a company's climate rating? And is there such a thing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is a very good question that I don't have good expertise on off the top of my head. We've thought about ourselves as a climate witness project doing more green energy investment kind of sessions. One of our regional organizers actually just did one that I wasn't able to attend last week. So I guess all of that to say is, yes, there are tons of helpful resources out there on where to invest, how to invest, that will even take your investment portfolio and help you to invest it in a way that gets the same kind of returns that you're getting now likely, but invest only in companies that are committed to green energy. So they're out there. I guess I could only say Google it because I know there are tons of great ones out there, but I can't tell you one off the top of my head.
Okay.
But they definitely exist.
And under the category of urgency, what piece of legislation right now jumps to the top of the list of things that we ought to be paying attention to in Congress?
Mm-hmm. Citizens Climate Lobby has legislation that places a tax on carbon, and in the name Citizens Climate Lobby, you can see it's a volunteer-run organization, and this is bipartisan legislation that's come through a many years consensus-building process amongst all different income levels of households, all different sizes of businesses, different perspectives on size of government from the right and the left. This legislation, the carbon tax legislation, it places a tax on carbon to disincentivize carbon outputs. And the money that it saves, I guess the money that it brings in through those taxes is redistributed evenly amongst all U.S. households, because all of us as households face the negative side of climate change and air pollution on the same level. So it has broad consensus, Republican and Democrat support. In the House right now, it only has one Republican co-sponsor on the bill, but in previous Congresses, it's had many Republican co-sponsors as well. That has to do more with the politics of who's going to support what right now. But look up Citizens Climate Lobby. They have really good legislation there that's moderate that a lot of people support. The Green New Deal is also another important piece of legislation that I think has a lot of great values as well. I think it has a longer way to go to be able to be passed, but I would totally support it if it passed, and encourage you to support it as well. You can support both of them. You don't have to choose between the two. That's a really good one too. Our thing when we look at legislation is we're always thinking about a just transition to clean energy. So that's a real key. We can have clean energy, but if we're not transitioning in a way that's fair to people who have already worked like in the coal industry or worked as blue-collar workers in other energy industries, there needs to be a transition for those jobs. And whatever transition is made, we want ownership to be in the hands of the people as much as possible, right? So if large utilities own all the solar panels, as opposed to many houses and churches and small businesses and nonprofits owning the solar panels, we believe that a more just transition means that more people will have their own ownership over their power sources. So, and Citizens Climate Lobby and the Green New Deal are both pieces of legislation that help to get us closer to that kind of an ideal.
Kris, thank you very much. This has been terribly helpful. I'd like to, while everybody's on mute and you can't hear applause, I'd like to invite everybody who's on the call tonight to show Kris your appreciation with a hand clap. And Kris, thanks. I'd like to close with a prayer very shortly. Your whole universe, O God, O Creator, is a burning bush. It calls us to turn aside, to pay attention, to see and hear and sense, and to wonder and to praise. So grant us new eyes, new ears, newly awakened hearts, to enter into your courts of nature and praise your holy presence here. Amen. And good night. Thanks, everybody.